Salt marshes that you get on the sides of estuaries are brilliant places to forage. They have a huge diversity of salt-tolerant plants. Many of them are edible. And then down here, when the tide is out, you have the estuary mud and lots of different seaweeds and things that you can eat. But when the tide is in, this little bit is only covered for a bit at high tide. This sort of salt-tolerant grass area with many different herbs and plants growing here, all in their own little niches, their own little depth. And then there's all the way up here, you get sort of different things right up to where the tide comes to. And then above that, you get sort of a more kind of habitats and different plants that will grow there. So you've got a whole different heap of habitats all right next to each other, which generally means lots of different things to eat. And today I want to look through the salt marsh and see what things I can find here, right in the middle of the winter, things that are always there. It's quite a stormy day today, not very hospitable conditions, but still it's good to come on a day like today to just see what you could find and what I can eat. One of the most useful plants that grows along the coast is the sea spinach or the sea beet, Beta vulgaris var maritima, and it's just like the perpetual spinach you get in the garden, and it's a bit smaller leaves. It's there all year round. In the winter it just sits there as loads of leaves, and you could just pick them and eat them. It just grows more leaves. And here, just above the tide mark here, a load of it growing here. It will grow up cliffs. It will grow on sort of meadows near the sea. It just like growing near the sea, and it's just here it's got the like last year's flowering stems, which then grow as little baby plants, and it sort of spreads a bit like a spider plant, and it grows these big kind of clumps. When you grow the leaf beet in the garden, it is like a biennial, but this one does tend to, the seaside version does seem to be perennial quite often. It's very good for you, full of vitamin A, C, and K, lots of iron, calcium, even zinc. Very good for your hair, digestion, inflammation, blood and circulation, urinary tract, general health and well-being. It's just very healthy green vegetable. And it's plentiful sort of in the upper levels of this tidal zone and a little bit beyond that. It will grow like up steep cliffs and rocks. It's always present, not just in estuaries, but also sometimes you get it like sand dunes and cliffs and things. So you get it all around the sea, North Africa, Mediterranean, Atlantic coast of Europe, Western Asia. It's very common, very prolific, doesn't mind being picked. So you can easily get your green vegetables for the day just from walking along like here, like on a salt marsh. There's just tons of it. And just like the perpetual spinach in the garden, it really doesn't mind being picked. As long as you don't pick every single leaf, it will just grow back. You can also eat the root, but it's not as nice and needs to be cooked. Wild mustard is another plant which you can commonly find in salt marshes, although it will grow in fields and meadows as well. It's like lots of sun, gets very tall in the summer. It's an annual plant, but these are like the dead stems from last year's and they've got no seeds left in them. So look around and see if there's any young plants, because quite often you find a few plants that germinate a bit early and you can sort of get a few leaves off them. Mustard is very good for coughs and colds, stimulate the appetite, good for digestion and blood, and you can apply it for arthritis and rheumatism. Sinapis arvensis, very tall yellow flowers, but yeah, I can't see any seeds in here at all. They've all dropped all of their seeds. So here there's a little plant that thinks it's a bit later in the year and growing there. So I can eat a couple of leaves, I can use them for medicine, or I can put them in with something else, a bit hot on their own, but they're not as hot as the seeds or the flowers. So they're kind of another thing you can eat that sort of grows here on the salt marsh, come from Europe, Asia, North Africa. They're sort of quite common, quite easy to identify, and of course they're kind of hot as well. So that's kind of something a little bit spicy. It's a bit late to find any German chamomile still flowering, but there are a few little straggly bits here. This is a type of chamomile isn't strongly scented, but it's more often used to make chamomile teas than the main chamomile is. And this chamomile grows quite a lot by the coast. Here's right on a salt marsh, but it's right at the top of the salt marsh into the kind of adjoining kind of meadows. And it likes to grow mostly near the coast. You find it in cliffs quite often. It's Matricaria camomilla, and it grows on the Mediterranean, Atlantic coasts of Europe, bits of Asia, sort of around different parts of the Mediterranean. And it's very good for sleep, very good for digestion. It's good for coughs and colds, skin conditions. And it's a really nice herb tea, but you can eat the leaves as well. The flowers are better made into tea, but yeah, the leaves are quite nice to eat. Petals are quite nice on the flowers. And usually they're finished by now. Usually they flower in the summer, but there's always some that straggle on, maybe as late as January. And if we're just doing a look in amongst the sort of grasses and things, you can see that a few that have been a bit sheltered, a bit more protected from the frost. And yeah, you can make a nice sort of calming, relaxing, anxiety removing tea. It's really nice to have a cup of that before you go to sleep. And it's available still, certainly enough for quite a few cups of tea on the Saltmarsh now. If you were ever stranded in such an area like an estuary, then generally you get a lot of wood. So if you wanted to have a fire and keep warm, then the tide brings wood with every tide. And there's always people down here collecting wood. But of course you do need some nearby forest. There's quite a few upstream from here. Now, little bits of kindling will kind of dry very quickly when it stops raining, as long as they're kind of off the ground, like resting on some brambles or some grass. And you know, you can have a fire once it's going. It's feed it with some bigger sticks and then some bigger ones, and you could just have a fire going, and that'll keep you warm. So it's a really good. And you do get quite a selection of different types of wood, all brought up with all the kindling by the tides. And quite often you find these sort of man-made bits like this one, which burn very, very well. These sort of man-made bits do always burn much better. These are like, some of the sticks like this will smoulder a bit, but you can generally build a fire to keep warm in such an area, and there's plenty of material. That's one thing there is. Once you've got a fire started, once it's dry enough to start one up, there's plenty of wood to keep it going so that you can keep warm, and that's always a good thing. So estuaries bring a constant supply of wood without having to damage any trees, because all these have already fallen off the trees, so it's always tons of wood. One of the most abundant plants on salt marshes is this common reed, Phragmites australis. It can get much taller than a person, and it forms this whole habitat where lots of herbs grow in. They're sheltered. It's a habitat for lots of animals. In the winter, it's mostly died back. The seeds are mostly gone now, and the tide comes up, quite a bit. It's right kind of on the top. The tide covers it a few feet here at high tide. The whole plant is edible. The seeds, the leaves, the stems, but generally cooked. The plant can be quite abrasive. It's very easy to cut yourself on it. The roots really the only thing that's available at this time of the year. And again, they'd need to be cooked. You see there's a few iris growing in amongst them there, some salt tolerant water iris. And it sort of grows up to about kind of that kind of level the tidal zone. The roots are said to be good for treating fevers and various things, but they're just sort of kind of dig to get them. And the ground is very squishy. Wherever they grow, the ground is kind of squishy. Water mint, Mentha aquatica, is just as happy on a salt marsh as it is in a freshwater pond. It's a herbaceous perennial. Usually it's died back into its roots, but there's still a few bits straggling here because the estuaries don't get as cold, so there hasn't yet been cold enough to frost them all back. And there's this gorgeous smell, very, very similar to the garden mint. and it's quite abundant plant, spreads into massive clumps, and it's very good for wounds and skin problems, and it's a good antiseptic. You can make it into tea, you can put it in cooking. The leaves and the flowers are used, for all sorts of things, and it's quite abundant anywhere with saturated ground or shallow water. So this very top area of the salt marsh, you do kind of find quite a lot of it. Naturally, it comes from North Africa, all around Europe, and quite a large part of Asia. And yeah, just likes these kind of conditions, salty or fresh water. And just as long as the ground's saturated and just spreads from underground roots, always usually sort of comes up in the spring again. And in the winter, you don't usually get any. But because this is an estuary and it's protected from frost, the season goes on for quite a lot longer, and it's quite happily still around in December. There's plenty of it to collect, but it does sort of dry quite easily, so you can store it for the time where you haven't got any. You can always find some sea campion by the sea. It's like a perennial, grows into this big spreading clumps. It will grow in gardens in rockeries as well, but it generally find it in the wild by the sea. Sometimes on the edges of salt marshes like here, or on rocks and cliffs and seaside meadows. It's quite nice to eat, but it does have saponins in it, so it's not good to have too many of it, although it could act like a soap substitute. But it's all right in nice little bits, and it does taste quite nice, and it adds a bit of flavour to other things. It's also good for treating wounds and anything sort of skin problems. But yeah, it's a nice little plant. It has these little white flowers. They've all finished now, a bit like campions, but only kind of 6 inches high and white. And yeah, a big clump of it going right into there. It can tolerate a bit of shade, and it's one of those plants that you even find on little rocky bits sticking out of the sea. It's always very common and plentiful, and just by picking a few little bits of it, it's not going to hurt it at all. It doesn't seem to mind a little bit of picking. And it's just a very easy plant to find with quite a nice little sharp taste to it. You can eat the flowers as well, but I don't think they're as nice. The sea aster is very common on salt marshes. Here are the old flowering stems. They look a bit like Michaelmas daisies. They've got purple or yellow flowers. Here's the leaves. The leaves are very succulent. The whole plant is very succulent and quite crunchy to eat. Quite nice to eat, really. It doesn't taste bad or anything. And you can eat the flowers as well when they're there in the stems. They're going to seed now. There's no stragglers left now. They've all finished. But plenty of leaves all through the winter. And these plant is quite good to apply to wounds and burns, bruises, various skin ailments. Good for digestion. But there's one plant that is really always available, and they grow right up there where the highest tides reach, and they also grow right down to the very top of the actual mud flat bit. So they have a huge niche that they grow in. And once you recognise them, you can always find them, and they are kind of like a nice, tasty little snack, full of sort of vitamins and nutrients, and not as abundant as the sea spinach, but pretty abundant nevertheless. You just have to walk further to collect the same amount, really. One or two leaves from each little clump here is usually okay, and the plants just grow more leaves, so they're very common and abundant. Sea purslane is another very common plant, and it likes to grow a bit further down, in between this sort of mud-flat seaweed area and the sort of grassy top bit. So it likes to grow in this kind of in-between bit, and it's like a kind of shrubby, floppy plant that floats in the tide like this. You can just pull a bit off here. It's got a kind of yellowy colour. And the leaves, the stems, the flowers and the seeds are all edible. Yeah, it's kind of good for digestion, inflammation, skin problems. The leaves are a bit kind of salty, and they have a bit of a weird taste. But the flowers, and in fact the leaves taste nicer when they're flowering. The Latin name is Atriplex portulacoides. And it's found Europe, Asia, Africa, even down as far as South Africa. and it sort of just grows on this little tidal niche like this. It's good for digestion, liver and kidney, urinary tract disorders. Here, there's some seed bits here. I'm going to try some seeds and see what they're like. These little kind of yellow blob bits on the stems. Just pick a nice big fat one here and try that. Yeah, that's much, much nicer than the leaves. Quite sweet, really, quite a nice flavour, and actually a little bit of protein, so that's quite good. The seeds are quite high in protein, and you can see just up here it's only growing in that little niche. Common bladderwrack seaweed is another useful foraging herb, generally easier to collect when the tide goes out a bit. It attaches itself to rocks in shallow coastal waters. You find it on both sides of the Atlantic, eastern North America, just about every coastal line of Europe, including the Baltic and the Mediterranean. It's grows like a mass of these little bubbly growths here. And it's all edible, but it is very rich in iodine, and it's not good to eat too much of it, but eating it now and again has a very cleansing effect on the system. Very high in iodine. And these little bubble bits, these vesicles, are quite nice to squish and apply for various skin conditions, sort of burns, inflammation, wounds, anything like that. And you can also eat them. They're quite nice fried. In fact, seaweed does taste nice in many types of meals. It's also you can just kind of dress up in it and be like a sea monster, or you can collect it and compost it and put it on your vegetable garden because it's really, really nutritious like that. But it's a very, very useful plant, and this stuff that gets washed up on the beach is not even growing anymore, so there's no problem collecting as much as you want of this. Just very, very nutritious, very abundant plants, and very, very useful. Just lob that over there a minute. Right, so that's quite a lot of foraging for today. I'm now kind of really soaking wet because it's been raining heavily during this whole video. So I hope you liked today's video. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you press the little me down there, you'll see all my other little videos. And see you next time.